Good morning and welcome to our Wednesday Word of Encouragement. Today is Veterans Day, and it's always a day that I stop and honor my father who served during the Korean War, my father-in-law who served during World War II. We thank our soldiers and the people in the Navy and the Air Force and the Marines and all of those who have served our country and protected our rights and our freedoms, and we're so thankful for them. But it's also a day that I recall that we are in an army today. We are in God's army. Maybe you remember the children's song that we used to sing in VBS. It says, I may never march in the infantry. I may never ride in the cavalry or shoot the artillery. I may never fly o'er the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. Yes, I'm in the Lord's army. We are in God's army. It makes me remember a story from Joshua chapter 5. The Israelites have been wandering through the desert for 40 years, and they come to the Jordan River. And the priests, as they enter the Jordan River with the ark, they step into it and the waters separate, just as they had done 40 years before in the Red Sea. And the people cross unto the promised land. But the promised land is, of course, held by the Canaanites, who are not about to give it up. They want it, they're going to protect it, and they're going to do everything they can to keep the Israelites from taking it. Well, Israel comes to their most fortified and protected city, Jericho. And they begin to wonder, how in the world are we going to win? Well, Joshua goes off by himself to pray, and an angel of the Lord appears to him in Joshua chapter 5, verse 13. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, Are you for us or for the enemies? Neither, he replied, but as the commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, What message does my Lord have for his servant? The commander of the army of the Lord replied, Take off your sandals, for the place where you are now standing is holy. How holy? And Joshua did so. This stranger identifies himself as a commander of the Lord's army. And because he's part of the Lord's army, Joshua must take off his sandals because he's on holy ground. What message did the Lord's servant bring to Joshua? His message was, the time of waiting is over. The time for the battle has come. The time is for you to do what God has called upon you to do. But he also reminds him, God will go with you. One of those treasured verses from the New Testament is Romans chapter 8, verse 13, that says, If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but gave himself up for us all, will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? That's the message that God is giving to Joshua. I'm going into the battle with you. You don't have to take this by yourselves. You're part of God's army. In fact, if you're going to drive the Canaanites out, it will only be by the power of God. Well, they must follow God's directions, and we all know the story of them marching around the city of Jericho and how they had to do it exactly the way that God told them to do it. I think there's a simple message here for Joshua and for us today. Trust in the power of God. If we believe that we are part of God's army, we may lose some battles along the way, but the book of Revelation tells us we win the war. And we know that no matter what life may bring, we know that we are part of God's army, that the battle belongs to the Lord. If God is for us, who can be against us? Back during the Civil War, someone approached Abraham Lincoln and said, are you worried about God? Or is this really a righteous war? And Abraham Lincoln said, I worry so much about that, and I pray constantly. I don't worry about whether God's on our side. I worry if we are on God's side. We need to make sure we're on God's side, that we understand that we are part of God's army, that that's the most important thing, that we be part of God's army, not ours. It's God's church. It's God's army. It's God's kingdom. He's in charge. One last song to close with, one of my favorite ones we sing now. The battle belongs to the Lord. Let me read you those words again. In heavenly armor we enter the land. The battle belongs to the Lord. No weapons that fashion against us can stand. The battle belongs to the Lord. When the power of darkness comes in like a flood, the battle belongs to the floor. He raised up a standard in power of his blood. The battle belongs to the Lord. When your enemy presses in hard, do not fear. The battle belongs to the Lord. Take courage, my friend. Your redemption is near. The battle belongs to the Lord. And we sing glory and honor and power and strength to the Lord. We sing glory and honor and power and strength to the Lord. Let's make sure that we're part of the Lord's army, that we're following his commands, that we are following him into the battle, because if we are, we will win the war. We hope to see you Sunday at 10, either in person or online, for our worship services. We are glad that you joined us today. May you have a blessed week.